fascinating writing that you do in talking in particular about the two big threats to the economy as you see it and irrational discrimination. Talk to us about some of the key findings.
So the real problem I think that we've got is that whenever we get a period of structural change in the economy, like we're getting now, prejudice tends to increase. And that's because you get a lot of turmoil. Some people find their incomes are dropping or their social status is declining, and they look for somebody to blame, and they look for a group to blame, and you get this sort of scapegoat economics. And I think what the pandemic has done is provide structural disruption in and of itself, but also it has accelerated some of the structural change of the fourth industrial revolution. And so we're seeing potentially, I think, an increase in prejudice coming through in the global economy. This is not uniquely an American phenomenon. Yeah. And so you've got rising prejudice coming in, and that's going to be particularly damaging, not just in a moral and a social sense, of course, but also in an economic sense. It's going to undermine some of the benefits companies and the economy could get from the changes that we're experiencing.
So then, Paul, within the context of American history, at least, we've been here before several times. You can go back to Reconstruction. You can go back to the early aughts of the 1900s. You can go back to the middle of the 1900s in the 40s and 50s, and even in the 80s to some extent. What got us through those periods? Did we actually repair the situation, or did we just put a Band-Aid over it that just allowed us to kick the can further down the road?
Well, if I can give a traditional economist answer, it's sort of a bit of both, frankly. So, yes, there has been improvement. There has been progress. And if you look at things like the World Values Survey, we find that each successive generation, particularly in recent years, tends to be more inclusive, more accepting of diversity. So there is absolutely progress that has been made. But at the same time, the fact that we're sitting here and talking about issues around race or around gender, a lot of these problems of diversity, a lot of the obstacles that minority groups suffer are a legacy of history. So, for example, if we look at ethnic minorities in the United States, they're far less likely to own property. And that's because in the past they weren't allowed to own property, or they didn't have the income, and so they can't then afford to educate their children, and their children don't own property, and so on and so forth. Why does that matter? If you are an entrepreneur trying to set up your own business in the United States, trying to get ahead, what's the one asset you can use to help fund your business? It's your home, of course. And so that creates another obstacle coming through. So we've got legacy from all of these past problems, but we shouldn't be too pessimistic. There has, of course, been progress.
There has been, and there's still focus and a lot of thought leadership on how to even this out. We had Andrew Perry of Brookings on Friday talking about how you can fine-tune the balance, perhaps inject stimulus into the small to medium-sized enterprises, black-owned businesses. And we just had Kate Lucio just talking about women, and I asked her about policy making, but she actually said, look, perhaps corporate America, corporates can support here and fill in some of the gaps. What do you make of companies helping to erode some of these misguided prejudices?
So, I mean, a lot of the focus of my work in the book is on the role that companies can play, because, what do companies need? They need the right person in the right job at the right time. That's how you become a successful company, obviously, and never more so than now. For all this focus on the technology of the fourth industrial revolution, the technology doesn't really matter. It's what you do with the technology that matters. And what determines the success of how you use your technology, whether you've got the right person in the right job at the right time. So companies have got an overwhelming incentive to pursue this. But I think part of the problem here is that whilst large multinational companies that are naturally diverse, they get this. They get the advantages of having a diverse workforce and getting really the best possible people working for them. Smaller businesses, less so. Yeah. And I think that's where the nudge of government policy is needed.
I've heard this argument, though, Paul, this idea that diversity is sort of a net benefit for the companies, the idea that there is an economic advantage. Talk to me about the flip side of that, though, because there are also a lot of people who will argue that there's not a tremendous disadvantage to maybe being a little bit more homogenous. And you've actually seen companies, certain CEOs, even make that case.
Well, I think there is a range of benefits that come through from diversity. Essentially, if you have got a relatively low-skilled job or a company which is predominantly lower skilled, where you are not relying on innovation and creative thinking and new ways of doing things, diversity is less important in a company like that from an economic point of view. Morally, socially, still extremely important. If you are in an innovative, dynamic, thought-led sector of the economy, diversity is absolutely critical. And if you're not a diverse company, then basically sell the shares now, because that company has got absolutely no future. Now, here's the problem. Over the next 20 years, we're not all going to be subjected to robot overlords. The machines don't take over. But the machines do take over the low-skilled jobs which are not particularly innovative or dynamic. Those are the jobs that are going to go. The jobs that are going to be driving the economy in the next few years are the innovative, thought-led jobs which require diversity to get ahead. So yes, by all means, say, no, our business is going to be best served by homogeneity. What that actually means is you're going to be replaced by a robot in the future. If you're a business which is served by diversity, you are the future for the economy.